She stood at the altar with trembling hands in front of hundreds of guests who barely hid their hidden laughter. Her dress was too simple for that luxurious hall, for that ceremony held under the spotlights. He, in contrast, wore a tailored suit and a look of mockery that few noticed. But she saw. The humiliation was not only in the eyes of those present, but in the complicit silence of those who knew the truth and pretended to be moved. When the judge asked if he accepted, the brief laugh that escaped one of the groomsmen echoed through the microphone. She did not turn around, did not cry, did not back down. She said yes, with a serene smile that no one understood. As they left the church, as photographers surrounded the two, someone shouted something that broke the silence. "How much was the bet, Mr. Ethan? 10,000 for a thrift store wife?" The world spun for a second. She did not look back, and for an instant, he lost the ground under his feet. On their wedding night, the room was silent. She sat on the edge of the bed, took off her cheap earrings and stared at the mirror with the same determination as before. He, with his back to her, still laughing at the messages on his cell phone, didn't realize that something was about to change. When he turned around, he found a letter on the bed with his name on it. He opened it carelessly, but the first line stopped him in his tracks. "Ethan, I agreed to marry you knowing about the bet, and that's exactly why you need to know who I am now." Inside the envelope, next to the letter, was an old yellowed photo of a skinny boy sitting on the floor next to a woman dressed as a nurse, holding a baby in her arms. On the back, a familiar signature: "To my adopted daughter, who saved my grandson's life at Shelter 14. The handwriting was Ethan's grandfather. The woman was her. The baby was him. The Lancaster family mansion was an imposing building, the kind that seemed to float between past and present, with white columns, standing like silent sentinels and tall windows that reflected more than light. They reflected lineage. At the top of one of the interior staircases, surrounded by imported marble steps and antique Persian rugs, Ethan watched the preparations for his wedding as if watching a boring play. There was not the anticipation of a loving groom in his eyes, but rather the vain boredom of someone who had won yet another game. On the other side of town, in a neighborhood of narrow streets swept by the June wind, the same ceremony was taking place in a different way. There, a small group of women embraced each other in silence, surrounded by simple flowers and hidden tears of pride. She wore no expensive makeup, no famous bridesmaids or inherited jewelry, just a straight dress sewn by a neighbor who had known her since she was a girl. Her name was Clara, and her silence that morning said more than all the words in the press that reported on the scandal of the unexpected marriage between one of the most sought-after heirs in the country and a young woman with no recognized surname. No one knew how Clara had achieved that position, and in truth she herself had made no effort, at least not in the traditional way. She had known from the beginning that this was a sham. He knew about the muffled laughter of Ethan's friends, the money involved, the bets made between expensive cigars and glasses of aged whiskey. But Clara was no ordinary woman, and much less a common victim. She walked calmly inside the extravagantly decorated room, receiving glances from top to bottom as if measured and judged by the surface. But inside, she carried a plan that no one there would understand until it was too late. Ethan, on the other hand, was the epitome of a man who never knew what it was to lose. Raised amidst luxury and reverence, he had learned from an early age to use sarcasm as armor and money as an answer. When he met Clara, in a cafe where she worked to help an orphanage, he found her simplicity amusing. He believed it would be easy, that she would fall in love like so many others. And when his friends proposed the bet, he thought it was funny. Marry a stranger, just to show that he could. But there was something about Clara that defied Ethan's logic. She didn't tremble at his expensive invitations, nor did she melt at rehearsed compliments. What amused him the most, and at the same time irritated him, was her silence. A silence that asked for nothing, that didn't explain, itself that didn't seek applause. And it was this silence that put her on that altar. No shouting, no fighting, no pleas for love. just a firm, strange presence that made everyone around her uncomfortable, as if she were seeing what no one else could see. And, in fact, she was. Clara learned early on that the world was not waiting for her. She was left on the steps of an orphanage at the age of 3, wrapped in a blue blanket and wearing a makeshift bracelet with someone writing her name in permanent marker. She never knew who her parents were. She grew up among other forgotten children, fighting for attention, food, and a little human warmth on cold winter mornings. There were no presents at Christmas, no long hugs on birthdays. There was silence. A silence that she learned to bear as someone who gets used to the lack of light. But Clara had eyes that saw beyond the peeling walls of that shelter. She had a curious soul who paid attention to details that others didn't notice. When one of the caregivers cried in the bathroom, she didn't ask anything, but she left a folded note with a paper flower. When one of the more violent boys had tantrums, she stood nearby without saying anything, just so he wouldn't feel so alone. Pain never scared Clara. What scared her was oblivion, the fear of going through life without leaving a trace. At the age of 12, she discovered that she loved to read. She would pick up abandoned books and hide them under her mattress. She would read, at night with a broken flashlight that only worked if the cord was bent at just the right angle. She read everything she could, stories of kings, wars, forgiveness, and new beginnings. And as she read, she began to build another Clara within herself, a Clara who did not beg for love, who did not kneel to be accepted. At 16, she asked to work in the shelter's kitchen and began saving coins in a glass jar. She wanted to take a nursing course, even though she knew she might never get a degree. She wanted to learn how to care for others because no one had cared for her. At 18, she left the orphanage with a backpack on her back and 2 pairs of clothes. There was no farewell party, just a cold handshake from the director and a "good luck" said without emotion. But Clara did not cry. She walked to the station, got on the first bus, and ended up in a big city where no one knew her. She got a job cleaning tables in a small cafe, where she also served tea to elderly ladies and gave calm smiles to customers in a hurry. It was there that she discovered the street orphanage, where she decided to donate her Saturdays to help children who slept outside, because she knew what it was like to sleep hungry and scared. And it was there that one morning, while she was taking care of a feverish boy, a well-dressed man wandered in by mistake looking for an art gallery that was across the street. This man was Ethan. He saw her with her sleeves rolled up, gently cleaning a child's face. She didn't even notice him right away, but he watched her for minutes, fascinated. Clara there was everything he didn't understand. She was pure, effortless. She was beautiful, without knowing it, and she was strong, without needing to prove it. What he didn't know was that behind that calmness, there was a woman with a past of deep wounds, stitched together inside. A woman who carried secrets, and one of them had his family name marked on it forever. It was on a night of loud laughter and raised glasses that it all began. Ethan was surrounded by his old friends, the same ones he had grown up with in international schools, who shared private jets and cruel jokes. The room of the private club where they were gathered reeked of Scotch whiskey and arrogance. Between one round of poker and another, the conversation turned to relationships. Someone commented, half drunk, that Ethan would never really get married, that he only knew how to play with women until he got bored. He smiled, leaned back in the leather chair and said disdainfully, "Get married? I'll marry whoever you want, even the waitress from the cafe if you dare me." They laughed. But one of them, Derek, the most provocative, threw out the idea. "The bet is made. We choose any girl. You win her over, take her to the altar and, well, throw her away afterwards. But it has to be real. A real marriage." Ethan hesitated for half a second, just out of pride. Then he raised his glass and toasted. "Done. In 30 days I'll be married. Choose whoever you want." Over the next few days, the friends roamed the city like hunters, until someone came back saying they had found the perfect girl, a cafe attendant with a serene look and a nice face. "She's so ordinary that you'll believe the first compliment. It'll be easy." They showed him a photo they'd taken on the sly. It was Clara. Ethan recognized her immediately. I'd seen her before at the door of a shelter holding a bag of toys. There was something uncomfortable about her, a quiet beauty that made him look twice. But he accepted. It was just another game. He got closer, little by little. He came into the cafe 3 days in a row, complimented her smile, and left absurd tips. Clara, as always, was not impressed. So he started visiting the shelter where she volunteered, saying she wanted to donate. She looked at him calmly, without rejection, but without amazement. That intrigued him. When she first agreed to go out with him, it was to accompany him on a visit to a children's hospital. He didn't know how to handle that kind of environment. She felt uncomfortable seeing Clara holding the hand of a bald girl, singing a lullaby. But he followed through with the plan. On the 23rd day, he proposed. Friends laughed when they learned that she had said yes. Some didn't believe him. Others prepared everything for the ceremony like someone putting on a play. It was just a bet. She was just a pawn. The day before the wedding, Ethan received confirmation from Derek. The money is in the account. 10 grand for this joke of yours. He smiled. He said it would be the most fun night of his life. But inside, something was wavering. Because, even without understanding it, that girl made him feel something strange. It wasn't passion. It was fear. Fear of what she wasn't saying. Fear of what she might be seeing. And fear of what he didn't yet know she knew. The first time Clara looked directly at Ethan, it was as if she didn't see him. He was sitting in the corner of the cafe, a newspaper in front of him, but clearly watching. She brought his order without ceremony, a black coffee and a slice of plain cake. He said thank you with a smile that had already won over dozens of other women. But Clara just nodded like someone listening to the sound of the sea. Present, but unhurried. In the following days, he came back. Always to the same cafe, the same place. And he began to try to break down that wall that wouldn't budge. He commented on the weather, made subtle compliments, asked irrelevant questions as if that would create intimacy. Clara responded politely, but never enthusiastically. She was polite like a tired teacher, kind like someone who has seen too much and learned not to react. This began to affect Ethan. Accustomed to women who laughed at his lame jokes and were enchanted by his arrogance disguised as charm, he found himself in front of a woman who neither feared nor flattered him. So he decided to change his approach. He showed up at the shelter where she was a volunteer, saying he was interested in making a donation. Clara, with a clipboard in her hands, explained how the place worked without looking away, but firmly. She didn't smile when he told her he was a businessman. She just said, "Money is welcome, but presence is worth more." He stayed. For an entire morning, the Lancaster heir washed food containers, sorted clothes, and helped pack backpacks for the children. It was the first time he felt ashamed of his own comfort. With each silent gesture of Clara's, he realized there was a firmness in her that disarmed him. It wasn't sweetness that she conveyed. It was integrity. At the end of that day, she thanked him with a clear look and told him he could come back whenever he wanted. And he did, several times. He made up excuses to show up, brought cakes, bought children's books, offered rides that she always refused, until one day, she accepted. In the car, he tried once again to break the silence. He asked her about her childhood. She simply replied, "I had everything I needed, a roof over my head and books." He smiled, thinking it was modesty. But Clara wasn't belittling herself. She was protecting something. At the end of the ride, he said he wanted to go out with her. Something special, just the two of us. She looked him in the eye for a few seconds that seemed too long and replied, "I'll go, but don't pretend to be someone you're not." He laughed. He thought it was charm. But inside, a chill ran down his spine. Something in him knew that this woman was not predictable. And yet, the bet went on. Clara accepted the invitation. They had dinner in a luxurious restaurant where she was visibly out of place but never embarrassed. She observed everything with a certain detachment that made him nervous. It was as if she knew more than she was saying. as if she were participating in a game whose rules only she knew. And then he asked her to marry him, in a dramatic gesture, in front of the reflecting pool in the garden of a hotel. She said yes, without tears, without hysteria, just yes, like someone who knows exactly where they are going. The room where the engagement dinner would take place was lit up like a fairy tale. Linen curtains fluttered in the breeze of controlled air conditioning. Floral arrangements were scattered in every corner, and waiters glided between tables with glasses of champagne. Clara wore a discreet, pale, beige dress made by a local seamstress that she had insisted on keeping even after Ethan's advisors had suggested something worthy of the occasion. She walked slowly, but with her chin held high, aware that all eyes were on her. But there was no admiration. There was judgment, whispers, muffled laughter. Ethan's mother made no attempt to hide her contempt. She watched Clara as if she were observing a flaw in the living room mirror. When she was introduced, she held out her hand coolly and said, "I hope you know what you're getting into, dear." Clara responded with a neutral smile and steady eyes. Ethan, standing next to her, pretended not to notice. She drank, laughed with her friends, made subtle jokes with double meanings. Until, one moment when Clara stepped away for a moment to greet one of the employees, she heard a comment from one of the bridesmaids. "She's a social project, is that it? Like a sentimental adoption?" And laughter spread around like poison. When she returned to the table, Clara said nothing. He just picked up the bowl and looked around. Ethan watched her, half bored, half curious to see how long she could take it. It was then that he approached, touched her waist, and whispered, "You don't have to try so hard. This is just a phase." She looked at him. Inside, something broke. But on the outside, her face remained still. It was as if every word said that night fell into a well inside her. A well that already knew the taste of rejection. After dinner, Ethan led her to the center of the room and in front of everyone proposed a toast. He raised his glass, smiled, and said, "To the surprises of life, to the right bets, and to the choices that amuse us." The guests laughed. Some applauded. Clara remained silent, but someone in the audience murmured in a voice too loud, "Bets, huh?" And another voice replied, "Yes, they say that was exactly that." The muffled laughter returned. Ethan ignored them, but Clara didn't. She knew that this was the exact moment. And yet he didn't react. He didn't explode. He didn't cry. He just put the glass on the table, walked to the exit, and stopped at the door, without turning around. He knew that everyone was watching her. He knew that they were expecting a scandal, a slip-up, a greater humiliation. But she just said, "Thank you for the evening." It was revealing. And she left. For a few seconds, Ethan didn't know if that was part of the plan, if she was faking it, or if she had won. But deep down, something in him knew. The humiliation that night hadn't been hers, and it bothered him more than he would admit. The day after the engagement dinner, Ethan woke up feeling more uncomfortable than he cared to admit. There was something about the way Clara had looked at him for the last time that wouldn't leave his mind. It wasn't anger or hurt. It was a clarity that hurt. He tried to get back to his routine naturally, but the messages from his friends laughing about the situation, remembering. The night of the bet irritated him more than they amused him. He decided to look for her. Not out of regret, but out of control. I needed to make sure she wouldn't go off script. Clara was at the shelter as if nothing had happened. She was playing with two children on the floor singing a children's song in the same calm tone as always. When she saw him, she didn't get up immediately. He asked for a minute, finished the song, and only then came over to him. Ethan tried to start with a thinly disguised apology. "About last night, people were cruel, I didn't mean to." Clara looked at him for a moment too long and then said in a firm voice, "I knew it." He frowned in confusion. "You knew what?" And she answered, "The bet, the money, the jokes, the conversations you thought were safe in your group of friends." He tried to laugh it off, pretending it was absurd, but she interrupted. You underestimated a lot of things, Ethan, including my ability to listen. The silence between them, stretched like a thick curtain. She continued without raising her voice. You thought you were choosing me, but I was the one who decided to play this game. Because sometimes, to heal old wounds, you have to look into the eyes of the one who hurt you. Ethan didn't understand. He was more disconcerted than ever. Clara then took a small folded sheet of paper from her bag, with a yellowed edge. She handed it to him. Have you seen this before? It was a child's drawing. A smiling boy next to a woman in a white apron and a baby in her arms. In the corner, a signature. With love to Clara. He held the paper as if it were burning. This is my grandfather? Clara nodded. I volunteered at the shelter where your mother was taken in when she ran away from home as a teenager. It was your grandfather who visited us one day in secret. He thanked me for taking care of her when she was pregnant and sick. He said he could never forget what I did. That baby was you. Ethan was speechless. He sat down without realizing it. The world was spinning and nothing made sense. You knew all this from the beginning? She confirmed with a calm nod. And why did you accept? The answer came like a cut. Because sometimes forgiveness needs to go through confrontation. And because what you represent, Ethan, is not just you. It's a wound, a structure, a cycle, and I needed to end it. She walked away, going back to playing with the children, as if nothing had been said. Ethan stood, still for long minutes holding the old paper with trembling hands. For the first time, he didn't know if he was the one in control. For the first time, he didn't know what Clara would do next. And that terrified him. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. The huge house seemed too small for the thoughts that were overwhelming him. The yellowed drawing lay on the table next to a forgotten bottle of wine. For the first time, he wanted to know, not out of vanity, but out of fear. Fear of what he had. Never bothered to understand. He rummaged through the old drawers of his grandfather's office, where documents lay like ghosts among leather folders and photos from the time when being a Lancaster was synonymous with absolute power. He found a letter. It was tucked inside a book on ethics and leadership, as if ironically. His grandfather's shaky handwriting read, I could never recognize Clara as part of the family, but she was the only one who was there when my daughter, your mother, was. Rejected by everyone, she took care of her. She saved you before we even knew you existed. Ethan's heart raced. He ran his eyes over the page as if searching for absolution. But there were only cutting truths. Ethan's mother had gotten pregnant very young and had run away from home for fear of being forced to have an abortion. She had spent months hiding in a shelter under another name, refusing contact with the Lancasters. It was there that Clara, still a teenager, had taken care of her. She washed her clothes, fetched food, read her stories to distract her from her pain. When the baby was born, it was Clara who held him first. He, the arrogant heir, had been held in the hands of that sad-eyed girl whom fate had now placed before him as his wife. But Ethan was only finding out now. He called his mother in the middle of the night. She answered with a hoarse, uncomfortable voice, but when she heard Clara's name, she fell silent. Did you know? He asked. A long sigh on the other end of the line. I knew. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because pain has a cost, Ethan. And I didn't want you to be ashamed of our story. Ashamed of what? That we were saved by someone our world would never accept. Ethan hung up with shaking hands. Everything around him seemed smaller except for Clara. Clara grew in his memory as a silent figure who had always been there, even when he couldn't see her. She was the one who silently watched his arrogant speeches. She was the one who smiled pitifully when his friends mocked his origins. She was the one who knew everything but preferred not to reveal it. Her dignity, at that moment, crushed him. He thought about looking for her, but he didn't know what to say. There was no apology that would sound enough. There were no words that would wash away the dirt of the bet. But he needed to see her. He went to the shelter the next day. She wasn't there. One of the children said that Clara had left with a backpack and wouldn't be back. For a while, she said she needed to remember who she was before all this. Ethan stood at the gate like a lost boy. The ground he had always known was beginning to crumble, and for the first time, there was no one to tell him what to do. Only the echo of his own conscience, and her absence, which was beginning to hurt like an incurable guilt. She had left without leaving a home address. No note, no explanation, just emptiness. And for the first time in his life, Ethan experienced what Clara had known since she was a little girl, the silence of absence. He looked in the obvious places, the shelter, the cafe, the small house where she had lived before she had accepted him. Everything was empty. The neighbors said she had left at dawn with a small suitcase and a book in her hands. She seemed calm, they said, but with a look of someone who would not be back for a while. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself wandering around the house like a stranger in his own story. Everything that had once given him pleasure, the invitations, the events, the private parties, now made him nauseous. The bet, which had once been a joke, was now a scar. The laughter of his friends was torture. He declined invitations, turned off his cell phone, and withdrew from the world. For the first time he was alone, and in the silence he began to see. He returned to the shelter, not as someone looking for someone, but as someone trying to find himself again. He asked to help with the children. He washed dishes, folded clothes. He brought toys he had bought with his own money but without fanfare. He sat in the same corner where Clara used to read to the little ones and tried to imitate her. One of the girls asked him, "Do you know the girl with the sad eyes who smiles beautifully?" He smiled back, his chest tightening. "I know her." And each day he spent in that place seemed to bring back to him a forgotten part of himself. He also began to visit hospitals and nursing homes, moved by something he couldn't name. It was as if, by touching the pain of others, he was touching his own. And Clara's image accompanied him in every gesture. On cold nights, he would return home and reread the letter she had left on their wedding night. Each word seemed to pulse with more force now, and each sentence hurt more deeply. Her name had disappeared from the spotlight, but not from his memory. The wedding, which had been headline news for weeks, disappeared from the society columns like an annoying stain. Friends disappeared. The engagement fell apart without public explanation, and he didn't correct any of his versions. He preferred silence. He knew that was part of the price. Even his father, always absent and pragmatic, called one night and asked, "Is everything okay?" Ethan, in a hoarse voice, replied, "For the first time, you're not. But maybe it should have been that way from the beginning." And he hung up. It was strange to feel pain as if it were healing, to miss someone he never had the right to call his own. He began to write letters that he would never send, and with each sentence, he tore apart a part of the man he had been. Clara, in his absence, had become a constant presence, a mirror of what he could have been, a reflection of what I didn't yet know I was, and it was there in the space she left that he began to understand what it really means to lose. What started as a rumor quickly turned into an unstoppable chain of events. All it took was a small leak, a recorded conversation between two guests at the engagement dinner, for the words bet, wedding, waitress, and Lancaster air to become fodder for the scandal-hungry press. Ethan found out about the leak too late. When his name was splashed across news portals with headlines that mixed mockery and indignation, he no longer had control over the narrative. At first, he tried to deny it. His advisors sent formal notes, claiming that it was all the result of misinterpretation. But it didn't stick. A short video emerged, Clara walking through the engagement hall, stopping at the door, turning slightly, and saying in a firm voice. It was revealing. That phrase became a symbol. Comments flooded social media. Some called her a saint, others a silent genius. Many, a heroine. Ethan, on the other hand, was described with adjectives he never thought he would hear directed at himself. Cold, manipulative, cowardly. The elite who had once revered him began to shun him as quickly as they would a failed investment. Contracts were suspended. Invitations were withdrawn. In the space of a week, Ethan had gone from being the face of the Lancaster Empire to the name behind a national humiliation. But the real downfall was not public. It was internal. The real judgment was not in the headlines but in the eyes of the building's security guard who stopped greeting him with respect, the driver who refused to continue working after years of silent loyalty, the housekeeper who quit, with tears in her eyes and said simply, "I saw her. She was different." And then there was the board meeting of the family company. There was no scandal. There was no shouting. But it was decided in a quiet vote that Ethan would be removed from the front office, not because of a marriage, but because his image was now toxic. The brand needs to breathe, they said. And so the man who had always believed himself untouchable was gently pushed out of his own story, without strength, without glory. Sitting at home, Ethan read the comments he couldn't respond to. Clara, on the other hand, had disappeared from all records. No interviews, no statements, nothing. And that hurt even more, because he knew that if she wanted to, she could have profited, promoted herself, taken revenge. But she chose silence. And that silence was the harshest sentence he had ever faced. For the first time, he understood the weight of a justice that doesn't shout, but keeps quiet. And while the world discussed his downfall, he tried in silence to build up what was left of himself, without knowing if there was still anything worth rebuilding. There was no single moment when Ethan became a different man. It wasn't an epiphany or a moving speech. It was a series of small gestures. It started with silence, the conscious choice not to justify himself, not to try to clear his name, but to accept the dirt as part of what he had built. Then came the habit of walking the streets like an ordinary man, without a driver, without an escort, without a gold watch. He passed places he had previously ignored. He observed faces scarred by life, children playing with cans, mothers pushing strollers through potholes in the asphalt, and in each face, he saw a reflection of what he had never dared to see. He visited the shelter often, but he didn't ask about Clara. He knew she would only come back if she wanted to. Instead, he created a routine. He arrived early, cleaned, helped with chores, read to the children. Most of them didn't know who he was. He was just Ethan. And that was enough. A 7-year-old boy who had lost his speech after a trauma began to draw after he began to sit next to him every day. One day, he handed him a drawing of 2 people holding hands under a blue sky. Ethan didn't ask what it meant, he just kept it. He also began to study. He read about education, human rights, psychology, not to prove anything to anyone, but because, for the first time, he wanted to understand the world outside the bubble in which he had grown up. At home, loneliness was constant but no longer oppressive. It was like an old companion who now served as a mirror. He looked at himself in the reflection and saw another man, someone less secure, more genuine. He cut ties with old friends. Some tried to contact him, offering private parties as before. He firmly refused. His father called him to take over the family business, offering him a strategic position. Ethan replied, "If I'm going to start over, let's start over." And he didn't go back. He began to invest in social initiatives. He created a silent fund to support low-income youth with access to education and health. Nothing had his name on it. He didn't want applause. He just wanted balance. One night, walking back home, he passed a graffiti mural with the phrase, "It's not about who you were. It's about what you do with what you learned." He stood in front of the wall for long minutes. He cried right there, for the first time in years. Not because of the scandal, not because of Clara, but because of everything he had inside and never had the courage to face. That transformation wasn't a project. It was a pain that became a choice, and the choice was daily. It was to look back and not run away. It was to accept one's own mistake as a brick for a new path. Clara was still absent, but her absence was now a seed. He didn't know if she would come back, but if she did, he wouldn't find the same man anymore. He would find someone who had finally understood the value of silence, dignity, and truth, even if he had learned it too late. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those when the sky seems lower and time moves more slowly. Ethan was walking down a quiet street in the neighborhood where the shelter had been temporarily moved during renovations. He was carrying a bag of books and fruit for the children. He had gotten used to that routine like someone learning to breathe again, slowly. He turned the corner and saw the blue gate. His step faltered. On the wooden bench next to the entrance, a woman sat reading in silence, surrounded by sleeping children. Ethan's heart stopped for a second that lasted too long. It was her, Clara. Her hair was shorter, her facial features slightly different, but it was her. She was there as if she had never left, as if she belonged there so naturally that he felt like an intruder. He didn't know whether to move forward or back. But she saw him. She didn't make an abrupt gesture, didn't show any surprise. She just closed the book and looked at him calmly. He approached slowly, each step heavy as if he were walking on glass. He stopped in front of her, not knowing where to begin. "You're back," was all he could say. Clara smiled slightly. "I've never really gone this far." He nodded, not knowing what that meant. He sat down next to her, but respected the space between them. They remained silent for long minutes, watching the children, sleeping on pillows and colorful cloths. Ethan took the drawing of the boy holding hands from his bag. He showed it to her without saying anything. Clara looked at it, recognized it, and didn't comment. She just smiled in a way he had never seen before. Light. Weightless. "There's something I've wanted to say for a long time," he began, without looking at her. "But no sentence seems enough." "Then don't say it," she replied. "Just show me." Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been trying. Every day." Clara looked at him like someone measuring the depth of a river before crossing. "You've changed." He didn't deny it. "I think for the first time I've begun to exist." She nodded, folding her hands in her lap. "And it wasn't for me. It was for you." Ethan lowered his eyes. "But it was because of you." She didn't answer. The silence between them was different now. There was no anger, no accusation. There was maturity. There was something healed that didn't need to be reopened. One of the children woke up, climbed onto Clara's lap, and whispered something in her ear. She laughed sweetly, then turned to Ethan. She asked if you're the boy who cries in secret in the book room. He smiled, his eyes brimming with tears. "Maybe. Then you're already someone worth knowing." Ethan didn't know what to make of that sentence. It wasn't forgiveness, nor a promise. It was recognition. Clara stood up, took the child's hand, and said goodbye with a firm look. "I'm glad you found your way." "Even without you?" She paused, thought for a second. "You needed to find yourself on your own. And you did." She took one step, then another, and disappeared into the trees of the courtyard, as if time had not touched her. Ethan stood there, motionless. There was no happy ending like in the movies, but there was peace. And that, perhaps, was greater than anything else. The days that followed their reunion were calm on the outside and intense on the inside. Ethan returned to the shelter 2 or 3 times, but he never found her again. He didn't insist. He knew the choice would be hers. Every time I arrived and didn't see her, I would stay silent, sit on the same bench as before and read a story to the children. I waited without waiting. He carried a small envelope in the inside pocket of his coat with the last letter he had written, but never had the courage to deliver it. Until one cloudy morning, he found a sheet of paper stuck to the front door, with his name written by hand. He recognized the handwriting immediately. He opened it right there, feeling the paper tremble between his fingers. The letter was short. Clara said she needed to write because spoken words are sometimes interrupted, but written ones remain. She said she had seen in him the change that few have the courage to experience, that it wasn't easy to unlearn how to be who the world expected him to be. You walked around naked inside your own soul, Ethan, and that doesn't go away. She explained that she would not return, not out of anger nor pride, But because the love she felt no longer needed to be a presence, it was a root. What happened between us was necessary, it was true, but it does not need to continue to be eternal. Some things only fulfill their purpose when they do not remain. Ethan read the letter with teary eyes. Each sentence was a sweet, firm, irremediable farewell. At the end she wrote, "You are free, and so am I, and that is the greatest forgiveness I can offer you." He kept the letter along with the first one she left on their wedding night. Both had the same essence: clarity, compassion, and a pain that did not need to hurt in order to teach. That night, he walked to her old house, where an unknown family now lived. He sat on the sidewalk for a few minutes as if visiting a sacred place. Then he went to the tree in the park where they had first spoken. He touched the rough bark, closed his eyes, and silently thanked her. It was not a happy ending in the conventional mold. There would be no romantic new beginning, no cinematic hugs. But there was healing, and there was an acceptance that hurt and freed at the same time. He understood that sometimes love is letting go, and that true forgiveness happens when two hearts can move on without carrying guilt. Ethan moved on. He continued his work at the shelter, investing time and life in projects that would have been unthinkable for him before. He never tried to look for her again, but in every choice he made, Clara was there. In the way she spoke to the children, in the way she listened to the other before responding, in the silence that she respected. Life didn't give Clara back to him, but it gave her back to himself. And that was more than he thought he deserved. Because now he knew. Love that transforms is not measured by duration, but by impact. It was late afternoon, and the sky was filled with shades of gold and gray, as if the day was hesitant to end. The children from the shelter ran around the garden with improvised kites and free laughter. Ethan was sitting on the old wooden bench, the one that had once symbolized waiting and was now just part of his routine. He was wearing simple clothes, his face was calmer, his hair a little longer as if time had finally settled on his shoulders. In his hands was a notebook with a black cover, where he wrote slowly with firm handwriting. One of the children approached him and handed him a crumpled little flower. He smiled, accepted the gift, and placed it between the pages. In the distance, a woman in a light dress passed by on the opposite sidewalk. She didn't stop. She didn't wave. But the wind played with the fabric of her clothes, and for a brief second, Ethan looked up and smiled, as if recognizing even from afar something that is part of the soul. Then he lowered his head and went back to writing. No tears, no words, just the breeze, the footsteps of children around, and the distant sound of a nursery rhyme, coming from inside the shelter. When he got up to leave, he forgot the notebook open on the bench. A loose page flew out, landing softly on the grass. On it, drawn in pencil, were two figures holding hands under a sky with simple, childlike lines, and Clara's name written delicately in the bottom corner. The wind blew once more, and everything was peaceful. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something inside you. So tell me in the comments with one simple sentence. I felt everything. This helps me understand that these stories are yours too. And if you were moved, leave a like. It makes all the difference in helping more people receive this message. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories that are already being prepared with the same care. And now before you leave, click on the video that's showing on the screen, because it will touch your heart even more. You're not alone, and I'll wait for you there.